Now, to discuss the summit, we are joined by Stephen Nix, International Republican Institute. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So the summit came to an end yesterday, and I would like to ask you a very broad, general question. What, in fact, was the aim of the summit, and has it been achieved?
Well, yes, I think the objective has been achieved, and the objective really is to define what is peace. How do we define peace? In order to restore peace, we have to know what the strategic objective is. That's been undefined. This summit clearly stated, reaffirmed the commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And it goes as far as calling for the withdrawal of all Russian forces and the restoration of Ukraine's pre-war borders. That means a return to the borders of 1991. So now that there's been a clearly defined statement of an objective of what peace is, now the West and its other allies can proceed to try to achieve that goal. And there are a number of steps that can be done to achieve that goal, which is the restoration of Ukraine's pre-1991 borders.
Right, but what about some of the other aspects, like nuclear safety, food safety? What about the humanitarian aspect of trying to bring some of these children back to Ukraine? How can the international community actually get involved?
Well, again, clearly stated objectives emanating from this summit. As you point out, number one, the safety and security of all nuclear institutions, facilities within Ukraine. Number two is the free flow of agricultural products through the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. As you know, Russia has attempted to block these food exports from Asia and Africa countries, which are crucial to their food needs. And then thirdly, as you point out, an exchange of all prisoners of war, but importantly, the return of all civilians from Russia to Ukraine. And as you point out, there's an estimated 20,000 children that have been abducted from Ukraine, sent to the Russian Federation, where they are undergoing Soviet-style indoctrination against their own country. So 3 key points in addition to the main point, which is restoration of the borders of 1991 for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. But because these points that you're just mentioning, that we're asking about, I mean, leaders of the countries that support Ukraine, they have been saying this since the war started in Ukraine. So why did Zelensky need to have all these leaders come into one place and to talk about it? What was the point of them coming all together and pretty much saying the same thing that we have been saying, for the past years?
Well, it was very important to set this strategic objective of what peace means, how peace is defined. Heretofore, Washington and Brussels were saying, we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. A very ill-defined strategic objective. So it was very critical that Ukraine and Zelensky convene these world leaders to come together and in unison proclaim what peace means, how peace is defined, so that we have an objective to work towards. And again, peace means restoring Ukraine's borders. And there are a number of things that the united countries present at the event can do. What it means is continued and expanded military assistance so the Ukraine can reclaim its borders. It also means up in the ante in terms of confiscation of frozen Russian assets to use to help equip Ukraine militarily. So there are a number of steps. Now that peace has been defined, the goal, the strategic objective has been defined in this summit, the countries who are supportive of the summit and its findings can continue to do the things that I've mentioned to help restore Ukraine, to help ensure a just peace. Not any peace, but a just peace.
Right, so now let's turn to some of the countries that were present at the summit, but did not sign the joint communique. And we have India here, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, United Arab Emirates, and the BRICS countries, right? Also from what we gathered, I believe Jordan and Iraq withdrew their signatures. So, what does it say about these countries and perhaps some of the fears they may have?
Well, I don't think anyone anticipated that everyone present would sign the document. And I know that President Zelensky and his diplomatic corps are going to continue to reach out to those countries. As noted in your broadcast, the president is going to continue his efforts. He's talking about another summit later on, and I think there will be concerted and serious attempts to engage these countries that did not sign, so that when the next event takes place, you'll have additions. I think that's the path forward.
So let me ask you a similar question, but from the other side. So over 80 participants signed the communique. Now, would you say this is a victory for Ukraine, for Zelensky?
Again, yes, this is a huge victory for diplomacy, for the international community, and particularly for Ukraine, because, again, we now have a defined objective for ending this war on peaceful terms. So now the signees, the countries represented at the summit, have to work towards that goal. And as I said, this means arming Ukraine. It means confiscating frozen Russian assets, everything that can be done to ensure a Russian withdrawal from Ukrainian territory. So yes, the objective has been defined. Now we can move forward. So this was a very, very crucial, important step in the peace process for Ukraine.
So as you're saying, the objective has been defined. So what now? I mean, countries are going to support Ukraine militarily as they were before. But what do you think is the next concrete step when it comes to bringing peace to Ukraine?
Well, as President Zelensky stated at the summit, we appreciate the help we've received, but we need more. The United States just adopted a few months ago a huge $60 billion supplemental, but that funding will run out at the end of the year. And so there will be a need for another U.S. supplemental. There will be a need for additional European support. So this is an ongoing process, but at least now we have a clearly defined objective that the West can achieve if it continues to provide Ukraine with the assistance that it needs to defeat Russia militarily and force a withdrawal eventually from Russian troops.
Right, so you said that Volodymyr Zelensky said that we need more. This is, of course, something that he has been saying, but this is also something that he has been mocked for recently by Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris has pledged another $1.5 billion, and of course, Joe Biden also committed to this 10-year bilateral support during the G7 summit, right? So, which was just a few days back. So I wonder, I mean, how is this Ukraine thing or Ukraine issue a factor in the U.S., especially ahead of the elections in November of this year?
Well, I think one of the issues in the presidential election will be international engagement, and the U.S. is heavily engaged. As you pointed out, Vice President Harris not only signed on to the communique but also pledged substantial assistance to energy infrastructure. I've just returned from Kiev, and can tell you that the energy situation, the electrical situation, is critical. There are rolling power blackouts in Kiev and many other cities, and the Minister of Energy of Ukraine has conceded that 50% of Ukraine's electrical infrastructure has been destroyed by Russian attacks. And this has to be restored before the winter, or it will be a very difficult winter. So this pledge by the United States is important. Europe needs to step up. We have to support Ukraine so that it can achieve the goals set forth in this peace summit. Again, total withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukrainian territory. And if we give Ukraine what it needs, I'm confident that that will happen.
But when you look, towards the future, do you think that future peace summits or peace talks, do you think they will have to involve Russia at some point?
Well, when Russia finally realizes that it needs to make concessions, yes, that will be an important entry point for negotiations. Ironically, while the peace summit is going on, the president of the Russian Federation was making demands that Ukrainian troops withdraw from their own territory in Luhansk and Donetsk and Zaporizhia and Kherson. Ironic that Ukraine is supposed to withdraw from its own lands, its own country. It's ironic, it's ridiculous, and so the West has to push back on this. Eventually, when Ukraine achieves more success in the battlefield, we assess that Russia will be willing to try to negotiate on terms more favorable to Ukraine. But again, that depends on assistance. I will tell you this, with the passage of the $60 billion supplemental by the United States, the arrival of F-16 aircraft, and crucial European support, we feel that the battlefield situation will change in the fall, and that will go a long way towards convincing Russia that they need to start negotiating on a good faith basis, which means withdrawal.
Stephen Nix, International Republican Institute, thank you, sir, for being with us this evening and for your insights.
Thank you so much for having me.